Good evening. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's great to be with you, learning on a Thursday night. A guten Erev Shabbos to you. Let's light up let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we gather to do page 33 here of Tractate Rosh Hashana, the 9th volume of the Talmud? It has 35 pages, so we're almost there. Our Siyum celebration of completing this tractate Saturday night with God's help. Who's with us tonight? Renee in Indiana, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula in Chicago, Lucy in Minnesota, Chaim in Charlotte, Bill in mid-Missouri. And over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. I wonder if something's going on tonight. Is some big event on TV or something that I'm unaware of? I don't know. I would like to dedicate our learning today to all the men and women, the armed forces, past and present. Thank you for your service. Freedom is not free. We don't take it for granted. We appreciate you. And thank you. We dedicate our learning tonight to you. And that includes the men and women of the armed forces of Israel as well. We pick it up on the B side of page 9. The B side of page 9. What am I talking about? The B side of page 32. With Mishna number 9 here in chapter 4. Tonight, with God's help, we'll be covering Mishnahs 9 and 10 of chapter 4. Mishnah number 9. With regard to the shofar of Rosh Hashana, one may not pass the Shabbos limit for it, i.e. to go and hear it. You may not walk further on Rosh Hashana than it would be permitted for you to walk on Shabbos, even though you're going in order to hear the shofar, which is a positive mitzvah that we're commanded to do. We're commanded to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashana. Nevertheless, if you had to desecrate the holiday by walking farther than your Erev Techum, right? You're farther than that limit, 2,000 cubits, at least from your home or from the edge of the Erev around your home, then you can't go that far and you would not be able to hear the shofar that year. One may not, nor may one clear a pile of rubble to uncover a buried shofar, because digging through the rubble is a kind of labor that is not permitted neither on Shabbos nor on a festival. One may not climb a tree. We may not make use of trees on Shabbos and festivals. Nor may one ride on an animal, nor may one swim in water in order to find a shofar to sound. And one may not cut the shofar to prepare it for use, neither with an object that is prohibited due to a rabbinic decree, nor with an object that may not be used due to a prohibition by Torah law. However, if one wishes to place water or wine into the shofar on Rosh Hashana so that it emits a clear sound, he may place it, as this does not constitute a prohibited labor. When I first read that, I'm like, what do you mean to hear a clear sound? If it's full of water or wine, there's going to be no sound. But presumably, it's like the shofar is somehow dirty or something is obstructing it, and you're going to use water or wine just to clean it out. so that you can get a clear sound out of it that is going to be permitted. It's just pouring water in and dumping it out is not going to be a prohibited labor. One need not prohibit. Gosh, I'm just stumbling over my words today. Hold on. Okay. One need not prevent children from sounding the shofar on Rosh Hashana, despite the fact that they are not obligated in mitzvahs. Rather, one occupies himself with them, encouraging and instructing them until they learn how to sound it properly. And the Mishnah adds, one who acts unawares and sounds the shofar without any intention to perform the mitzvah of blowing or hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashana, if he sounds it unawares, he has not fulfilled his obligation. And similarly, one who hears the shofar blasts from one who is acting unawares, not realizing that he's creating shofar blasts, has not fulfilled his obligation. Neither the one who sounds it in a state of unawareness, nor the one who hears one blowing who is unaware, have fulfilled their obligation. That's Mishnah number 9. The Gemara. And the Gemara asks, there is a principle that a positive mitzvah overrides a negative mitzvah. Now, with this in mind, what is the reason that one may not perform a prohibited labor on Rosh Hashanah to fulfill the positive mitzvah, the positive commandment of sounding the shofar? Recall, what is a positive commandment? Thou shalt. You shall do such and such. What is a negative commandment? Thou shalt not. Now, generally, the penalties for violating a negative commandment are greater than for failing to do a positive mitzvah. And the reason is, if you fail to do a positive commandment, well, later you could do it, or at least the next year you could do it. There's a fix for something that you failed to do. You could always do it later. But a negative commandment, if you violate that and do this forbidden activity, I mean, you did it. You can atone for it. You can bring a sin offering for it. There's things you can do, but you can't undo what you did. So if that is so, why do we have this principle that, generally speaking, a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment? I'm not sure. It's not explained here. However, what we are being told is that is a general principle. So if, for example, we have a negative commandment, thou shalt not climb trees, you shall not make use of trees in any way on Shabbos, but there was a shofar in a tree, so in order to get the shofar so that you could blow it and hear the shofar blast on Rosh Hashanah, you had to climb that tree. You would think that if a positive mitzvah overrides a negative mitzvah, you could go climb that tree, get the shofar, and then blast it and sound it. But our Mishnah has just told us we cannot do that. So what is the reason? And the Gemara answers, sounding the shofar is a positive mitzvah, but performing prohibited labor on a festival violates both a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah. The negative mitzvah is, that thou shalt not perform this prohibited labor on the festival. We understand what the negative mitzvah is, but why is it also a positive mitzvah? What positive mitzvah do I violate when I climb the tree on a festival or on Shabbos? The positive mitzvah, to rest, right? To rest is not just abstain from doing prohibited labors. To rest is a positive command. You shall rest on the festival. You shall rest on Shabbos. Therefore, if you climb that tree, in one action, you're violating both the negative mitzvah, the negative commandments, don't do these prohibited labors, and the positive commandment of resting on that day. Resting, obviously, like the rabbi and the cantor who are working, they're working hard for us as agents of the congregation, as it were, but they're not violating the commandment to rest, which has specific meanings on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So therefore, you can't climb the tree in order to perform the positive mitzvah of hearing or blowing the shofar, because climbing it violates both a positive and a negative commandment, and the positive doesn't come and override something that is both a positive and a negative commandment. The Mishnah taught one may not pass the Shabbos limit. You may not walk more than the 2,000 cubits from your home in the absence of an eruv, i.e. to go and hear it. Nor may one clear a pile of rubble to uncover a buried shofar. We just had that in the Mishnah. Now it's the commentary on that. One may not climb a tree, nor may one ride on an animal to find a shofar to sound. And the Gemara questions the order of these prohibitions. Now that you have said that to sound the shofar, one may not perform an action that is prohibited by rabbinic law, right? That limit of how far we're allowed to walk on Shabbos, 2,000 cubits from our home, that limit is established by virtue of a rabbinic decree. That's not stated in the Torah. But now that you said I may not violate a rabbinic decree in order to hear the shofar blast, is it necessary to say that one may not perform an action that could lead to an act prohibited by a Torah law, i.e. climbing on a tree or riding an animal? And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is teaching, employing the style of this, and it is unnecessary to say that. So even though it's teaching, the more restrictive case first, and then the more obvious case, it's employing that style. It just didn't say the words, and it is unnecessary to say that. It says, you can't violate a rabbinic decree and you can't violate a Torah law. Even though we would have known that if you can't violate a rabbinic decree, obviously you can't violate a Torah law. Nevertheless, the Mishnah teaches in that manner. Now we're at the top on the A side of 33. The Mishnah stated one may not cut the shofar if it needs to be prepared, neither with an object that is prohibited due to a rabbinic decree, nor with an object that may not be used due to a Torah prohibition, a written Torah prohibition. And the Gemara explains an example of an object prohibited due to a rabbinic decree is a sickle. You can't cut your shofar with a sickle. Now that's by rabbinic decree because the sickle is not ordinarily used for preparing a shofar. So that is an example of an object that may not be used due to a prohibition. And an example of an object that may not be used due to a prohibition by Torah law is a knife, right? So in other words, if normally you cut a shofar with a knife, okay, so you can't cut that shofar on Rosh Hashana because what you're really doing is striking the final blow. It's like you're finishing the manufacture of that shofar, and you can't do that on Rosh Hashana. Nor may you complete the production of that shofar even with a tool that you normally wouldn't use for that purpose, like a sickle. In either case, it's going to be prohibited. And the Gemara asks, now that you have said that to sound the shofar, one may not perform an action prohibited due to rabbinic law, is it necessary to say that one may not perform that action, an action that violates a prohibition by Torah law? And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is teaching, employing the style, this, and it is unnecessary to say that. The Mishnah continues, however, if one wishes to place water or wine in the shofar on Rosh Hashana so that it should emit a clear sound, he may place that liquid inside. And the Gemara infers water or wine, yes. Now that it said, it didn't say liquid and it didn't just say water as an example of a liquid, it stated two liquids, water or wine. And we learn from that water or wine, yes, but some other liquid, no. And what is that other liquid that you may not place inside the shofar so that it should emit a nice clear sound? Urine. To our ear, why would you ever put urine, inside a shofar? And the answer is that in the ancient world, urine was considered, a very useful liquid for certain things. I mean, it was part of the tanning process. And in the daily recitation that we read in the morning prayers, I think in evening prayers as well, where we talk about the incense offering that was offered in the temple, and it talks about what were the different substances that go into the incense. And one of the substances that would have been appropriate for the incense was urine, but out of respect to the Holy Temple, we do not use urine in the incense. And likewise, urine would be a useful liquid in order to clear out the shofar. It's not like they had alcohol readily available or acetone or the various solvents that we have now. And urine is something that was used in a lot of different industrial processes, particularly tanning. But on Rosh Hashana, to clean out the shofar, no, you don't use urine out of respect to the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashana. And the Gemara asks, who is the Tana of the Mishnah? The Gemara answers, it is Abba Shaul, as it is taught in a Baraisa, that Abba Shaul said, with regard to water or wine, one is permitted to pour these liquids into a shofar on Rosh Hashana in order to make it sound clear. However, with regard to urine, one is prohibited to do so. Why? Due to the respect that must be shown to the shofar. Although urine is beneficial, it is disrespectful to place it in a shofar, which serves for a mitzvah. Our Mishnah further teaches one may not prevent children from sounding the shofar on Rosh Hashana. And the Gemara infers, if women wish to sound the shofar, one indeed prevents them from doing so. And the Gemara asks, isn't it taught in a Baraisa that one does not prevent women or children from sounding the shofar on a festival? And the Gemara answers that Abaye said, this is not difficult. This Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, while that Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon. So, are women permitted to sound the shofar? Now, obviously, in modern times, in egalitarian settings, in Reform synagogues, conservative synagogues, Reconstructionist synagogues, etc., you're going to hear women sounding the shofar all the time. What about in a traditional setting? What is the law? Although women are exempt from sounding the shofar, they are not obligated to sound the shofar. Why? Because it's a time-bound positive mitzvah, and women are exempt from time-bound positive mitzvahs. So although women are exempt from sounding the shofar on Rosh Hashana, they may do so if they wish. And this is also true with regard to a child. They may do so if they wish. The question that comes up over and over again is debated even in modern times is if somebody is not obligated in a mitzvah, may they recite the bracha, the blessing, prior to doing that activity? And that's a different question subject to dispute. Now, we continue. As it is taught in a Baraisa, speak to the children of Israel, and he shall place his hands upon the head of the burnt offering. Leviticus 1, verses 2 through 4. Now, the phrase children of Israel literally means, because it's Bnei Yisrael, sons of Israel. And this teaches that the sons of Israel place their hands upon offerings, but the daughters of Israel do not place their hands upon offerings. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon say it is optional for women to place their hands on the head of an offering before it is slaughtered. Right? So when the temple is standing and we're bringing certain kinds of offerings, the one who brings the offering and is going to hand it over to the priest to bring it up on the altar will perform smicha, which is placing the hands on the head of the offering before it is slaughtered. So if a woman is bringing the offering, and women certainly could bring offerings when the temple was standing, do they perform smicha? So Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon say it is permitted, it is optional for women to place their hands on the head of an offering before it is slaughtered, although they are not obligated to do so. So apparently, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon, if a woman wishes to perform any mitzvah that is not obligatory for her, she is permitted to do so. And here too, one does not prevent a woman from sounding the shofar. And indeed, that is the law. The Mishnah further states, rather, one occupies himself with them. Going back to the question of children, are children permitted to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashana? They're obviously not obligated, but they're permitted to blow it. So one occupies himself with them. One gets busy with helping the children blow the shofar, encouraging them and instructing the children until they learn how to sound it properly. And Rabbi Lazar said this applies even when Rosh Hashana occurs on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar, as we've discussed before. But if a child wants to attempt to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which falls on Shabbos, you allow him to do that and even help him to blow it properly. You just make sure that it doesn't get carried through the public domain. And this is also taught in a baraisa. One occupies himself with children until they learn to sound the shofar properly, even on Shabbos. And one does not prevent the children from sounding the shofar on Shabbos. And needless to say, one does not prevent them on the festival of Rosh Hashanah that occurs on a weekday. It's very dry here in LA. I have a hygrograph, a humidity meter. And it's telling me that here in my office, the humidity is less than 20%. Perhaps that's why my lips are chapped. Okay, the Gemara asks, this matter itself is difficult, i.e., there is an internal contradiction in the Baraisa. You said that one occupies himself with the children until they learn how to sound the shofar. And this applies even on Shabbos. So apparently, we say to them, ab initio, sound the shofar. And then the Baraisa taught, one does not prevent the children from sounding the shofar. And this wording indicates that although one does not prevent them from sounding the shofar, we do not say ab initio, sound the shofar. Right? So the difference is, if they pick up the shofar and they blow it, we don't stop them from doing it. Or is it, hey, you want to check out this shofar? Have fun, blow the shofar. Do we encourage them to do it, or do we simply allow them if they take the initiative themselves? And the Gemara explains this is not difficult. Here, in the first clause, the Baraisa is dealing with a minor who has reached the age of training in mitzvos. This child is taught to sound the shofar, as one is obligated to teach him the proper way to perform mitzvos, commandments. However, here in the second clause, the Baraisa is dealing with a minor who has not yet reached the age of training. Although one need not prevent this child from sounding the shofar, one does not encourage him to do so. We're on the B side of page 33, and that actually concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 9. Now we go to Mishnah number 10. Today's actually a short daf, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in now. We're going to be done pretty soon. Mishnah number 10. The order of the blasts is 3 sets of 3 blasts each, which are tekiah, teruah, and tekiah. Tekiah, teruah, tekiah. And that sequence would get repeated 3 times. And then in another section, there would be a different sequence that might be tekiah, shavarim, tekiah. Right? So the same tekiyahs, and the shavarim would be, and then back to the tekiah. Right? And then sometimes you have tekiah, shavarim, teruah, tekiah. And that's those different sequences is how we get to the 100 blasts that we need to hear on Rosh Hashana. When I did the teruah, that all counts as 1 blast, right? A long tekiah or a teruah with 9 or 11 blasts contained within it, each one of those is considered 1 blast. Now, the length of a tekiah is equal to the length of 3 teruahs. And the length of a teruah is equal to the length of 3 whimpers. If one sounded the first tekiah of the initial series of tekiah, teruah, tekiah, and then extended the second tekiah of that series to the length of 2 tekiyahs, so that it should count as both the final tekiah of the first set and the beginning tekiah of the second set, he has in his hand the fulfillment of only 1 tekiah. He must begin the second set with a new tekiah. Now, we've encountered this teaching before. This question never really comes up because the Baal Tekiah, the shofar blower on Rosh Hashanah, is going to be very careful to, not run one blast into the other. His lips might get tired. It might, happen accidentally. But normally we're very precise with the way that gets done on Rosh Hashanah. And there's a person standing next to the Baal Tekiah and telling him which blast he should be blowing right before he blows it. So there's no memory involved for the shofar blower. The guy next to him is reading and telling him exactly which blast to do next. So he says, Tekiah, Teruah, etc. And he calls each blast. Now, with regard to one who recited the blessings of the additional prayer, meaning the blessings contained in the Musaf Amida on Rosh Hashanah, and only afterward a shofar became available to him, he sounds a tekiah, he sounds a teruah, he sounds a tekiah, in order he repeats 3 times. So in other words, if Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. And so you might recite these blessings without blowing a shofar. But it could also happen that you're not blowing the shofar not because it's Shabbos, but because no shofar was available. The shofar broke, the shofar got lost, it somehow ended up no shofar. And then somehow they find the shofar. What does he do? And this is how he handles that situation. And just as the prayer leader is obligated in the prayer of Rosh Hashanah, so too, each and every individual is obligated in these prayers. And Rabban Gamliel disagrees and says individuals are not obligated as the prayer leader fulfills the obligation on behalf of the many. And indeed, what is a prayer leader called? He's called not a prayer leader in Hebrew, he's called a shliach tzibur, the agent of the congregation, right? And so the prayer leader kind of stands in for the congregation, and it is enough for at least certain prayers to say Amen after the prayer leader, and then we have fulfilled our obligations. However, certain prayers he can't say for us. We have to say them ourselves. Specifically, Modima nachnu lach, right? We give thanks. So when you're saying thank you to God, you can't have your agent say thank you on your behalf. That's, very good etiquette, good lesson to learn from the prayer book there. If somebody does you a favor, you can't have a third party go for you who's going to go see that guy anyway and say, hey, tell him I said thanks. When somebody does something for you, you have to say thanks yourself, directly and personally. And on the subject of the shliach tzibur, it's funny that we're reading this now because something I noticed this morning during the Tachanun, right? So on Mondays and Thursdays in morning prayers, we have the extended Tachanun, a vidui, which is a confession, and a kind of, al-chet, like sort of beating our breast and acknowledging before God our many, many faults, how sorry we are, asking for forgiveness, that we should do better, etc. It's kind of like getting into that Yom Kippur mindset. And we do that every Monday and Thursday in the morning prayers. And as part of that liturgy, I encountered the phrase chesed chinam. Chesed chinam. Now the word chinam you might recognize from the phrase sinat chinam, right? Which is baseless hatred. Why was the Second Temple destroyed? Because of baseless hatred among the Jews for each other. Within the Jewish community, there was baseless hatred from one Jew to another. Too much of it, and it led to the destruction of the temple. So this word chinam means baseless or unearned. So what is unearned chesed? Unearned loving kindness, right? So chesed chinam means that even though we behave so badly and we've fallen short in so many ways, we ask God, please bestow unearned loving kindness on us. Forgive us for our sins. Allow us to succeed in our endeavors. Allow us to earn our livelihood or to receive a livelihood in this world, etc. And if God was treating us with his attribute of strict justice, right, we would not receive as much loving kindness as we do receive every day. We receive so many blessings from the Lord. And it's an act of unearned kindness. And that struck me today. It's funny that we're reading about the shliach tzibur, because you've heard me play music many times from Shlomo Katz. And Shlomo Katz is a dear friend. He's one of the great singers in the Jewish world. I'm also friends with his dad, Avshalom Katz, who was a congregational chazan, a cantor for many years in various congregations around LA, in other cities. He lives in Israel now, as does Shlomo. But when I had a conversation with Shlomo once in Israel, he was telling me that his father, every time he steps in front of the congregation to lead the congregation in prayer as the shliach tzibur, as an agent of the congregation, leading them in prayer, he acknowledges that it is an unearned kindness, that he's alive, that he's representing the congregation, that everything comes from the Lord is an unearned kindness. Even if we work hard, even if we, earn our bread by the sweat of our brow, etc., still, the fact that we're alive is an unearned kindness from the Lord, and that's meant to stimulate us to be as deeply and profoundly grateful as possible every day of our lives. And Avshalom, when he would focus on that prior to prayer, it would get him to a place of profound gratitude and joy, right? The idea is to serve with joy. Tomorrow I'll be sharing a meme, which is a saying from the Baal Shem Tov. And while I was researching today different sayings of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, over and over and over again in the writings of the Baal Shem Tov, he said, you must cultivate happiness. You must find a way to be joyful, and you should serve God with joy, right? And now, there's nothing we can do about just changing our mind when it comes to clinical depression. I'm not addressing that. But most of us can get into a foul temper, into a foul mood, into a complaining and bitter attitude, simply because we focus on the various shortcomings of the people around us, of ourselves, what we lack, etc. And if we would focus on the many blessings in our lives purposely in order to cultivate joy, then we would start to get there, right? In other words, fake it till you make it. Like just pretend to be happy, focus on what should make you happy, and eventually you're definitely going to increase your level of joy. And it's a skill that you can get better and better at. And you really should feel that the opportunity to do mitzvahs, to serve God, to praise God, to thank God, to sing to God, to pray to God, to be with God is a privilege, and it's one that we should do with great joy. And says the Baal Shem Tov, prayers addressed to the Almighty with joy are more effective than any other kind of prayer. Now, certainly we also have a teaching that the gate of tears is always open, and somebody who's just pouring out his heart before God because he's in a really terrible place and is praying from that place, that's beautiful, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. That is to be praised as well. But in pouring out one's heart to God and in prayer, will often find that those tears will be converted to tears of joy, because they're being heard by our Father in heaven, who loves us, who wants good for us. And even if we can't understand the reason for our troubles, in the midst of our troubles, we develop and we cultivate faith that there's a reason for them, and that's another path to joy. Those are all lessons that are related to the chesed chinam, the baseless chesed, the unearned grace, right? The unearned loving kindness that we receive from the Lord, that I learned about from Shlomo Katz, about his dad, Avshalom Katz. And finally, the sages taught in a baraisa, from where is it derived that the blastings of the Shofar on Rosh Hashana actually should be performed with a shofar. We've talked about before that when a fast was proclaimed in the temple, they used trumpets for that. So how do we know when it says that it is a day of sounding, that means it has to be done with a ram's horn, that it has to be done with a shofar? Maybe it could be done with the silver trumpets. How do we know it has to be done with a shofar? The verse states, Leviticus 25:9, then you shall make a proclamation with the blast of the shofar. But on what day does it say the blast of the shofar? On the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement, you shall make proclamation with the shofar throughout all your land. Okay, so we blast a shofar at the end of Yom Kippur to signal the end of the fast, and we blast a shofar on Yom Kippur every 50 years, right, in the Jubilee year. But where do we know that the soundings, the blasts of Rosh Hashana should be with a shofar? Now, from this I have derived the halacha only with regard to Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year. From where do I derive that the soundings of Rosh Hashana must also be with a shofar? The verse states, of the 7th month. Since there is no need for the verse to state of the 7th month, remember that we call Tishrei the 7th month when Nisan is the first month, the month of Passover. Even though the calendar begins again, a new year begins on Rosh Hashanah, it's also called the 7th month. Since there is no need for the verse to state of the 7th month, as it already states on the Day of Atonement, which we know is in the 7th month, what is the meaning when the verse adds of the 7th month? This comes to teach that all the obligatory soundings of the 7th month must be similar to one another, and therefore the shofar must be used. And the verse states the blast, the teruah of the shofar, indicating that one must sound a teruah. And the Gemara asks, and from where is it derived that the teruah sound is preceded by a straight blast, i.e. a tekiah? And the verse states, then you shall make proclamation with the teruah of the shofar, indicating that the teruah must be preceded by the basic sound of a shofar. And what is the basic sound of the shofar? The tekiah. And from where is it derived that the teruah sound is also followed by a tekiah? And the same verse states again, you shall make proclamation with the shofar, which indicates that there must be another tekiah after the teruah. And that's how our sages derived that in those sequences of blasts, it should be tekiah, teruah, tekiah, or tekiah, shavarim, tekiah, etc. All right, let's go to questions and comments. Sharon says women and children are not prohibited, but not obligated. Exactly. Can they therefore blow shofar for the community? And see, that would indicate no, right? Because one who is not obligated cannot blow the shofar to allow others to fulfill their obligation to hear it, right? So I think according to strict halacha, only somebody who is obligated in shofar can blow the shofar so that the people listening to it, the ones who are obligated to hear it, fulfill their obligation by listening to that blast. So in other words, it's permitted for women and children to blow the shofar, but the ones listening to such a blast have not fulfilled their obligation. Yosef, from the daf of the other day concerning blasting the shofar on Yom Kippur, if it falls on Shabbos, only among the Sanhedrin outside of Jerusalem, I was wondering how the average person could hear this blast if they are not near the place where it is being blasted. Maybe I misunderstood the halacha. I was thinking it could only be blasted in the place where the Sanhedrin were. Yes, that was the idea. On Shabbos, we don't blow it. Right, we don't. Now, Yom Kippur can fall on Shabbos, and then I guess we don't blast the shofar during Yom Kippur, but we could hear the shofar after Yom Kippur has ended. I guess the question would be, do we hear when? What happens when Yom Kippur? There's only one blast on Yom Kippur. So when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos, I mean, you can't hear the shofar during Shabbos because we don't blast the shofar on Shabbos. unless you're in a city where the Sanhedrin is. Okay, so those people are lucky, but everyone everywhere else is in the same situation we are. No shofar on Shabbos. Now, what I can't remember is, do we hear that shofar blast after Yom Kippur ends? Right now, it's no longer Shabbos. Yom Kippur ended, Shabbos ended. You could hear the shofar then, but then it might be too late because the moment has passed. You're no longer in the holiday in order to hear it then. But at any rate, we don't hear the shofar on Shabbos unless you happen to be in a place where the Sanhedrin is. Everywhere else, no, you don't hear a shofar that day, and you don't need to hear a shofar that day because that is the law. Sharon, B'nai, okay, so here they were saying that with respect to Semicha, that, the B'nai Israel, the children of Israel is how we normally translate that, but literally means the sons of Israel place their hands on the burnt offerings, and from this we learn that the men are obligated, the women are permitted but not obligated. Now Sharon says B'nai, or she's spelling it B'nai, means both sons and children of both sexes together. And she's right. Like when you make a plural, and you're going to say the children of Israel, plural, right? You're going to use the masculine construct, but it's going to stand in as a plural for both men and women. And that's why we are all the B'nai Yisrael, okay? So there is no single word that's a gender neutral word like children in Hebrew. So how does one not get into this restrictive mentality? It is not reasonable to expect them to say Banai v'benot, right? The sons and daughters every time children is the intention. Absolutely right. And the question is, why did the sages, or the one who's deriving that law, saying that women are not obligated where men are in that specific instance of laying hands on the burnt offering, why are they choosing to interpret that as an obligation for men and a permission, not an obligation for women? Are they going to do that across the board? Right? Are there other laws that are stated, the B'nai Yisrael shall do such and such, where it really means all Jews? And if so, why would you make a distinction in the case of burnt offerings that we don't make in that other case? It's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. And David Roop, why can't we just build a tabernacle? Does it really need to be in the same place as the temples were? Yeah, it needs to be there. Why? Because, in fact, where it discusses the tabernacle or the house of the Lord, even in the Torah, it says, you shall bring my offerings to the place that I will show you, or the place that I will indicate. But God selected that place. So the location of the temple, right, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, that is the place where the binding of Isaac happened. That's also the place where we read about in this week's Torah portion where Jacob had the dream of the ladder ascending to heaven and the angels descending and ascending. And that was the place selected by God. So we can't just go build a tabernacle and bring offerings and have the other services in some other place. And, we're just not, I think it's a pretty universally held ruling throughout the Jewish world, and since the destruction of the Second Temple, that we're not going to be building the third temple until we receive that instruction from God. And since we don't have prophets anymore, that instruction is going to come. Either we're all going to literally hear God's voice tell us to do it, or more likely that instruction will come from the Messiah, right? From Mashiach. And how will we know that the Messiah is the Messiah and not just some guy saying, yeah, take my word for it. God wants us to do it. Build a temple. The Messiah will come with all manner of signs and wonders, and the world will be utterly transformed, and we'll know that the Messiah is the Messiah when the Messiah comes. And until then, no tabernacle, no holy temple. Rick Davis, is the method of teaching a child to blow the shofar prescribed? I don't think so. But what it seems to indicate is, be patient. It says, busy yourself, right? What was the wording? It was very interesting, actually. Right, one does not prevent children from sounding the shofar on Rosh Hashana, even though they're not obligated. Rather, one occupies himself with them, encouraging and instructing until they learn. So, I don't know who a professional shofar instructor, what manner of teaching they employ, but the fact is you patiently work with the kids until they get, a nice clean shofar blast out of the shofar. And I've spent some time with the kids, and in the beginning it's very difficult, very frustrating. A lot of people have trouble getting a sound out of the shofar. I certainly did for a long time. And then eventually, you get it, and it's very satisfying when you do. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, tomorrow we'll be together for page 34 of Tractate Rosh Hashana at the regular Friday time, which is noon Pacific. I anticipate it'll be a relatively quick class tomorrow because our friends that are having the Shiva Minyan this week, that's going to be their final day of Shiva. And that's at 1 o'clock, and I need to finish the class and get over there to that Shiva. So you can expect that class will be on the short side tomorrow at noon Pacific. Have a great night.